On August 6, 2018, history was made when Toodler5er7 set a new record in the any percent category of Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, beating the previous record by 2 seconds. This run topped another from Axium, a runner known for his top times in many Pokemon games. His 4-hour, 30-minute, and 23-second run came from just 2 weeks of attempts and was one of the biggest streaks of luck in Pokemon speedrunning. Alright, cool. But what's the big deal? Gale of Darkness is a game which doesn't have a ton of glitches or exploits, so speedrunning consists of good movement and completing battles as fast as possible. This means there's a focus on obtaining good Pokemon which can meet that demand and a ton of RNG. Runners have 2 main Pokemon as their damage dealers throughout the game, Espeon, a Psychic type, and Ursaring, a normal type. Both learn a range of moves which help them take on anything that's thrown at the runner. Gale of Darkness's predecessor, Colosseum, is in a similar boat. Espeon is used in a similar capacity, and instead of Ursaring, Feraligatr or Typhlosion takes the slot. However, there is one small problem with this strategy. Not all Pokemon are built the same, and if the ones players receive are not good enough, it's back to the title screen to try again. This meant that runners could do thousands of attempts and not even get close to the record. As for Axium, it only took him 601 tries to get what he considered a clean run good time. Impressive, considering he never ran the game before. Another veteran runner by the name of Ryzakin even mentioned that 433 was not too out of reach, so a 430 was all the more impressive to see. Moving forward 9 months later, and after a whopping 3,902 attempts, Toodler topped Axium's legendary run and had this to say about it. I lost 2 minutes to not knowing how to PC heal. A 2-second world record with 2 minutes of time loss, combined with no major changes to the route? We're gonna need some context for this one. On the surface, this all seems pretty simple, but like any Pokemon speedrun, there's specifics not obvious to the casual player. The series has 2 hidden values which determine a Pokemon's stats, in addition to its base stats. From Generation 3 onward, these are effort values and individual values, EVs and IVs for short. EVs are gained through defeating Pokemon that give experience, so think of them as being directly controlled by the player. When enough of a single EV is accrued, the related stat increases. On the other side of this, IVs are set values that come with the Pokemon. These can't be changed by the player directly without modifying the game. IVs come in values of 0 through 31, with the rule being bigger number better Pokemon. Runners don't want low IVs in specific stats, as these influence damage ranges in both defense and offense throughout their runs. It also affects the type and damage of the move Hidden Power, which is used to exploit weaknesses in many of the game's battles. There's no way to determine this in-game, so an IV calculator is used to figure out if the Pokemon is good or not. In addition to good IVs, runners also want a good nature to go along with this. Natures are another Pokemon trait that can't be changed and come in 2 types. Ones that influence stats, and ones that don't. The ones that don't are considered neutral natures, which have no effect on stats. The ones that do offer a bonus in one stat, but a penalty in another. IVs and natures are used to determine if Pokemon are runnable or not, and this is a common occurrence in many Pokemon games. Not getting a runnable Pokemon is a reset, and if you're aiming for a good time, less of these Pokemon are runnable. These requirements are narrow, and the reset times were brutal. For Gale of Darkness, reset points were at the 1 minute and 30-second mark for the Eevee, and again at the 11-minute mark for the Teddiursa. Colosseum has a similar start, with a 1 minute and 30-second reset point for the Espeon, but a horrendous 20 minutes for the Croconaw. For years, anyone wanting to challenge top runs would need the stars to align for their Pokemon, then hope the game played nice in the 3 to 4 hours after. Some days, runs wouldn't happen, and players would need to come back at another time. Over 6 years ago, the speedrunning community overall was coming into new, more advanced strategies to use in their games. Practice tools were being made, more glitches were surfacing, and runners were even diving into the code of games to further understand them. In the Pokemon community, Red version was one of the first to see the fruits of these changes, with a new record thanks to a strategy called RNG manipulation. In Axium's record from September 2016, resetting, then doing perfect movement from a specific location would nab Axium a God Nidoran male, having excellent stats for the speedrun, and it turned out he could do this with every single attempt. No longer would runners reset the bad stats, and a golden age of perfect Pokemon was upon the community. As time went on, more generations adopted variations of Manip to make runs consistent. But there was a problem. The GameCube entries were left behind, still suffering at the hands of not one, but two Pokemon needing a good stat roll. But why was this the case? RNG in the early Pokemon games progressed after the game launched with the set value. As for the GameCube games, however, these are handled by the console's clock, which sounds simple, but it gets complicated fast. The initial seed when the console is booted corresponds to the lower 32-bit of the TB CPU register, with the value on boot being loaded from the console's crystal clock. This lower 32-bit increments once every 22 billionths of a second, which is so precise that just having an optical disc loading could introduce too many variations for manipulating the initial seed. This made manipulation impossible in a real-time setting. Not being able to get an exact outcome and dealing with over 2 to the 32 potential seeds, it looked as if the community needed to move on from this pipe dream. Several months before Tootler's Gale of Darkness run, a user by the name of Aldolaro was floating around the GameCube Pokemon community. Aldolaro had a ton of experience in reverse engineering GameCube and Wii games, and Ryzakin asked if he could put those skills to use here. The community already had a tool called Colo Predictor to verify IVs in both Colosseum and Gale of Darkness, and Ryzakin even worked with the creator, DeBombstew, to get exact info on IVs in Hidden Power thanks to some RNG research Ryzakin shared with him. More of this knowledge came in part by a Japanese shiny hunting program called XD Seed. Players could set the clock, give it a range of seeds to pick from other information, and grab a shiny Pokemon if set up correctly. However, its lack of precision meant that it wasn't made for real-time speedrunning. Combine this with the language barrier and not knowing how the program's code worked, there was only so much the community could get from it. Ryzakin had the idea to use the method from XD Seed, but in an RTA setting. With some initial testing, Aldolaro found out it was possible in theory, so he started to work on a seed finding program for the community. By early May, he had a proof of concept ready to go, and it was time to do some testing. The future of Colosseum and Gale of Darkness speedrunning was looking bright. But there was another problem. Remember the 2 to the 32 or 4.2 billion found seeds I mentioned earlier? It turns out that crunching so many numbers requires a ton of computer power, and the seed retrieval could last up to 30 minutes on a modern CPU at the time. This could be cut down by setting the system clock back to its epoch, or midnight on January 1st of 2000, cutting down the seeds from 4 billion to a ballpark of hundreds of millions. But this was still far from ideal, as runners would need to change the system clock every time they reset, so the community kept working to remove this step from the process. DeBombstew and another user by the name of Thurler did some tests, and they came across something which completely shocked Aldolaro. It turned out the seeds to reach the Battle Now menu heavily converged, meaning a completely different starting seed could output the same Pokemon info on those screens. This changed the amount of possible seeds from over 4 billion to about 100 million. With the help of Thurler, Aldolaro was able to implement this into the tool, making the process of getting a seed much faster, and more importantly without resetting the console's clock. Runners could take the preview info from the Battle Now screens, put it into the tool, and after repeating this process a few times they had their seed. Now the only issue was the player naming screen, where the RNG seed would advance every frame, but runners could use a metronome to perfectly confirm the name on a good seed. Aldolaro calculated that for Colosseum, the chance of getting a run past 20 minutes went from 3 to 5%, all the way up to a possible 30%, with Gale of Darkness giving similar results. There was still the issue of not manipulating the secondary Pokemon, as RNG is re-rolling every frame, but at least one of the barriers was removed. So after implementing the changes from Thurler, and including DeBombstew's Colo Predictor tool in the Seed Finder program, Aldolaro released it to the community in early July of 2018. And thanks to this, Ryzakin was able to get a new PB right away in Colosseum any %, and Tootler obtained a 2-second world record in Gale of Darkness any % only a month later. And times in these categories and more would come down in the coming years, combined with improvements to the seed finding tool from runner The Only Juan, and a new seed finder for the PAL version of Gale of Darkness from Capital, since RNG rerolling works differently before starting the game on that release. Links to these tools and runners can be found in the description. Special thanks to Aldolaro and Tootler for helping me with this video, and special thanks to my Patreon supporters who go above and beyond to support the channel. Stay hydrated folks, and click on this video for another amazing speedrunning story.